Welcome back to my channel, guys. Today we're going to talk about 4 things that you have to plan for your interview season. And congratulations now that you have this interview or a bunch of interviews. It's always a good thing to have these things happening during your application. And I wish you good luck, and I know you're going to make it. But, while you're preparing for this interview trail, I have 4 things that I would like to share that might be helpful and you might be able to use during these times. So the first thing that you should consider when you're applying for when you're doing your interview is transportation. If you're flying in from outside the US, I would suggest giving it a good solid 36-48 hours of rest, so you don't have the jet lag and you're better able, conditioned to do your interviews. So most of my interviews were in the city, so I was able to take the subway, bus, and in one of my interviews in Long Island, I had a friend of mine drove me there. And at the end of the day, at the end of the interview, I met a couple of guys who were from New York, and so they dropped me off in one of those subway stations. So I took the subway back to my hostel. So if you're driving, that's a good thing. Just make sure that you allot a lot of plenty of time to process the legal papers for that. If you have family here in the US who can drive you, then that's the best case scenario. So the second thing that you should plan for is your accommodation. You should decide whether you'll stay in a hotel or a hostel. So if you're staying in a hotel, then that would be more expensive, of course. I stayed in a hostel for most of my interviews, and I would not suggest that or recommend that to everyone, just because my experience and my tolerance for staying in those places are different with most of the people that I was talking to. Anyway, so I was short of money, so I stayed in hostels. I told you in my one of those videos that I uploaded that I stayed in a hostel with probably 8 or 16 people every day, and most of them are backpackers from Europe. So it was great, but you would need some form of sleep before your interview. So just an FYI. In one of the interviews that I had, I stayed in a hotel closer to the hospital just because it was closer, and I figured traveling from one place to the hospital where I'll be interviewing in, it would be more easier for me that time to just spend money for a night and then prepare myself for the interview next day. Now, if you're traveling with people, or if you meet people in USMLE forums or student network sites, then you can decide whether you want to share a room to split the cost, and that way you can save money for other stuff. Now, you also have to think about holidays. It's November, it's Thanksgiving, and then Christmas, and then New Year. So you have to make sure that your interview dates would not fall on those dates, or at least you would have enough time when you think about traveling or transportation, because the airports would be packed, and tickets would be more expensive. So the first one again is transportation. Number 2, accommodation. Number 3, you should think about the weather. Try to plan ahead, and if you're doing your interviews during the winter season, then plan ahead with that, packing your clothes, which would be appropriate for cold weather. And then you should also think about alternatives in case you have snowstorms, or you get stuck in a place where it's hard to move from your hostel or hotel to the hospital. So it's always good to have families around, just because they can rescue you, they can help you with this kind of situations. But if you're traveling alone, just what happened to me, I interviewed during the early winter or winter season, so I booked my interviews within 2 weeks. So it's like as soon as I landed in New York, I had like an interview every probably a day, and then every other day after that. So before I traveled, I checked the weather, possible like 10-day weather, and then check for like weather reports, what to expect during those times. If you're driving, then it's going to be trickier just because traffic would be bad or maybe not, but always be mindful about the weather here, because depending on which state you go, it can be really tricky. Now, the last thing that I would recommend would be having cash. During my interview season, I found it helpful to have cash at hand, just because you will need $5-10 to buy your subway card or ticket, and then if you have to pay for food when you're eating outside or when you're traveling in between, then cash is always good. So what I did was I had probably $200-300, which I broke down into like 20s, and then 10s, and then 5s. Just, you know, you will never really think about these things, but once you start moving from one terminal to the other, then you realize that having a small amount of cash would really help. Anyways, again, for your interview season, prepare for 4 things. Number 1, transportation. Plan for that flight, jet lag. Number 2, think about where you're staying, your accommodation, hotel, hostel. Think about the cost. Would you like to share a room with other people who are interviewing in the same place? The third one, think about the weather. Try to plan ahead and make sure you're ready for the worst case scenario. And the fourth one would be preparing for a small amount of cash in case you have to travel or pay for food or coffee. Well, good luck, and if you have any questions, just drop a comment. Please follow, like, share, subscribe. I'm here, and good luck to you. I'm happy for your interviews. Have a good day.